Hi folks, Wooden Boat Dan here. Just wanted to give you a heads up. The podcast you're about to listen to was recorded several years ago, so some of the phone numbers, email addresses, website links, and time-sensitive information are no longer valid. Please keep that in mind as you listen. If you'd like to contact me, my email address is woodenboatdan@gmail.com. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. You have successfully tuned in to Hooked on Wooden Boats weekly podcast episode number 74. I am your host, Dan Matson, aka Wooden Boat Dan. If you can't do it, nobody can, although there's imposters all over the world. And this is the world's first podcast fully dedicated to celebrating the art, craft, history, tradition, and romance of wooden vessels all over the world. Thanks for tuning in today, folks. Great to have you with me on the show. I am sitting in my home studio, actually my away from home studio at the Starbucks parking lot in Burlington, Washington. Recording in my car, then I go in and have a cup of coffee and start putting the audio together on my lunch break from my day job. And I'm having fun as usual. Today's featured segment is an interview with Ken Greff. It's actually part one of two parts. Ken is the president of the nonprofit called Sound Experience, actually the president of the board. And Sound Experience manages the historic schooner Adventurous. Adventurous is a gaff rig topsail schooner, I believe. That's what you call it. These terms get a little technical for me. She is 101 feet on deck, built in 1913 at the Rice Brothers Boatyard in Maine, designed by BB Crowninshield of Boston, Massachusetts. Beautiful boat, so stick around for that interview. Part one today, part two next week. It's going to be a lot of fun. This past weekend, I went down to Mukilteo to Ken Greff's house, did the interview there. And then I headed down to the Center for Wooden Boats in Seattle, one of my favorite places to visit. And while I was there, I got to interview Mindy Ross, who heads up their sailing education department. It's a really fun place to visit, lots of activity, people learning how to sail, people signing up to be volunteers. There's always stuff going on at the Center for Wooden Boats. Got a few pictures, said hi to a few people. And so it was a very fun day Saturday. And actually this Friday, I'm going to head over to Port Townsend for the day, my second home away from home, or my first home away from home, depending upon how you look at it, and do some interviews over there. And I always look forward to that. I haven't been to Port Townsend since November, so I'm pretty happy I'm heading that way. If you're listening to this podcast and you're not in the wooden boat game, it's time you get into the game, folks. I encourage you to rent a wooden boat, buy a wooden boat, sail a wooden boat, build a wooden boat, buy a wooden boat magazine, get a wooden boat calendar, do something with wooden boats. They're really fun. It's really great stuff. It's very satisfying to build a small boat yourself, or a big one for that matter. It's just a blast. So if you are interested and you have questions or need encouragement or whatever, shoot me an email, dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. I don't get paid to make these wooden boat announcements, by the way. Just thought I'd throw that in. Okay, I'd like to give a shout out to our new subscribers to the electronic newsletter. This week we had Anton Wellen sign up, Ab Kopanal, and Suhitha Edarisingh. So welcome to the newsletter list, folks. Great to have you on board. For those of you that haven't signed up, get on your computer right now, go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/subscribe, provide your first and last name and your email address, and you will be signed up for my monthly newsletter where I share fun facts, tips, resources, videos, cool stuff about what's happening in the wooden boat world. And this publication is actually ranked in the top 5 in the world. Maybe it's the bottom 5. I can never remember. Nah. It's a lot of fun. So sign up if you feel like it. It'd be great to have you on board. It's a way for me to connect with people. I've got some listener feedback in the form of an email from Jim Lynch. Jim says, Dan, having come upon your podcast several weeks ago, I have just about caught up with all the episodes now. From my point of view, they have all been very enjoyable. Well, the interview with the parties was pure class. With the great diversity of all of the guests that you have interviewed, while still keeping wooden boats as a central theme really works well. There certainly is some gravitational pull that draws amazingly interesting people to wooden boats. Best regards, Jim. Jim, thanks for that note. I love getting words of encouragement like that. People are listening and having fun with the podcast. And I do enjoy interviewing people in all walks of wooden boats. You know, people that are building something in their backyard. They've got a day job like me. People that teach wooden boat building for a living. People that have sailed all over the world in wooden boats. People that work on wooden boats. I mean, the whole gamut. We do it here on Hooked on Wooden Boats. And also, if you do have ideas for people you would like to see interviewed, shoot me an email. And if it's all practical when the time comes, or practicable, not sure which of those it is, I will check it out and consider that for a future interview. I think I mentioned before when I first started this podcast in September of 2011, I did a few shows and then I thought, what am I going to talk about now? But as I started interviewing people, I learned about other people and then other people, and now my interview list has gotten quite long. There's people, I mean, your neighbor with his garage that he never opens, he's probably got a wooden boat in there. Who knows? I mean, they're all over the place. So it's fun stuff, definitely. We are going to move on now to the interview with Ken Greff. Again, this is part one of two parts. We'll play the second half next week. Today will be like 40 to 50 minutes in length. The next week, a little shorter than that. So let's get this thing rolling. Take it away, Ken. Okay, it is February 9th, 2013. I am sitting with Ken Greff in Mukilteo at his home. Ken, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you.
Good to have you today. And Ken is the president of the board of Sound Experience, which basically runs the Schooner Adventurous and all of her programs. Is that right?
That's correct.
Pretty accurate? Okay.
Yeah.
So, Ken, I'm just curious, where did you grow up? Where are you from originally?
Yeah, I'm originally from San Francisco.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and we came up here when I was in grade school. My dad got a job at this place called Boeing.
Oh, wow.
And, so imagine that, right?
Yeah.
So we moved up to the Puget Sound area, and I've been here ever since.
Okay. Did you do any boating as a kid, Ken?
My family was more into stream fishing.
Okay.
And so it wasn't really until I was in high school. We lived on Mercer Island, and some of my friends had some little sailboats, so I would go out sailing with them, and then ended up my first actual boating education, if you will, was I took a Red Cross small boating class.
Red Cross,
yeah.
Small boating class.
Yeah, small boating safety class.
On Mercer Island?
On Mercer Island. And then the YMCA had a small boat sailing class, and so I took that. And then that was kind of it until I got to college. And I was up at Western it was at the time a program for elementary education, and it was the science education class. And one day the prof said, "Hey, does anybody want to help me crew my sailboat on Saturday?" And I thought to myself, well, what could be the matter with that? That can't hurt my grade. So sure.
Really?
And he had me out on a T-bird.
Oh, nice.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So we were, and it turned out
Bellingham Bay?
Bellingham Bay. Well, it turned, what I somehow missed in the conversation is that this was an overnight race. So off we went. And,
only a guy would not ask questions
exactly.
and not know
sure,
that, right? A woman would know. She'd be all packed.
So it was about dawn when we got back, and I was glad to find some food.
Wow.
It was quite an experience, and I ended up doing a fair bit of sailing with him on his T-Bird, and that's really what got me in what I think you would call keel boats, and sailing in the San Juan area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For those listening, a T-Bird was designed in the 50s, I think. Wasn't it in the 50s or 60s?
I believe that's right, yeah.
And it's a plywood sailboat, or racing, a one-class boat.
Right.
Designed down in Big Harbor.
Yeah.
At the, what was that? I used to know the name of that Eden Boat Shop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
In fact, I met the guy hopping down there. His dad was part of that process. But anyway, so the T-Birds are cool boats. It's
Wonderful
a sloop,
boat. Yeah.
Pretty fast boat, seaworthy.
Yeah. Fractional rig.
Yeah. Very cool. So that's kind of when you first started sailing
that
more seriously.
Really it, yeah.
Yeah. So that was when you were at Western.
I was at Western.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then what did you do after that, Ken?
Well, I started teaching. Turned out after college it's a good idea to get some income.
Yeah,
and,
right.
Once I got teaching, that's where I discovered the profession of school psychology. I didn't really know it existed before that, because there were school psychologists that were supporting the program I was working with. And this was in 1974. And so you may recall that was a kind of an interesting time in Seattle history. If you're familiar with the billboard that was down south that said, "Last person leaving Seattle, please turn out the lights."
Yeah, right? Exactly. Yeah. Big recession.
Yeah, Boeing
was
big
layoff.
Yeah, they had to cut their SST program and a number of other things, and so it turned out that a lot of families were leaving, and so the schools were shrinking as well. So the first person out the door was the new young teacher, right?
Yeah.
So what else do you do in your 20s? You go back to school. So I had an opportunity to apply for the school psychology program, and was able to get in, and so I did that. And fortunately, soon right after that, I was able to get a job again in Bothell, teaching. So I was teaching and going to school, going to graduate school, and that lasted about almost 4 years. So as you can imagine, that was a pretty busy time. There wasn't any sailing going on.
Yeah, I bet.
Okay. As I got towards the end of that, one of the things that happened, so again, this will date this, was 1976, the summer of 1976. So, as you recall, that was the bicentennial of U.S. Mm-hmm. And that summer, there was a huge parade of sail, tall ships coming into New York Harbor as part of that entire festivity. And that really put sail training on the map.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
I had not really known much about it before that. And so in watching that coverage and reading about it, they really introduced sail training to the community, to the country. And here I am working with people that really have some significant challenges. Behavioral problems, emotional problems
in the school
system, yeah. Etc. That's and one of the things that I was becoming aware of was how vital it was to have a counterbalance, to have positive things, growth opportunities for young people that are stuck in immersed in whatever the challenges that they may have, that they have a hard time seeing beyond. Mm-hmm. And so I was intrigued with the concept of sail training, because it's all about building character and leadership and having a different perspective on yourself and life and the world. And you listen to the youth that were out experiencing this, and it was an entirely different sense of who they were and their sense of themselves and a vibrancy about their life and experience that they'd had. And so I started reading about it, and at the time, what you'd find what was written in National Geographic, Irving Johnson's voyages on Yankee, and other real pioneers in the sail training world. And I was, as a school psychologist, I was fascinated by it. And so I started asking around. I thought, well, where is there any sail training in Puget Sound region?
Yeah.
And I wasn't particularly connected with the sailing community, but I just started literally wandering the waterfront. And one of the first ships I saw was Sylvia.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that.
Well, Sylvia was a Baltic ketch that was owned at the time by Les Bolton.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I had it's a...
From Grays Harbor Historical Seaport.
Right.
Yeah.
He's now, he runs the Lady Washington. So I had a fascinating several conversations with Les, and he was in the charter business at the time. Okay. He lived aboard and was in the charter business with Sylvia. But he said,
Puget Sound?
In Puget Sound.
Yeah.
Yeah, up in the San Juans. And the boat was actually down near Fremont.
Oh, really?
I was just driving along. Oh, there's an interesting mass. And so I went and talked with him. And so he introduced me to a friend of his named Ron May, who had the schooner Norden. And the Norden was also a Baltic schooner, about 85 feet. Ron was living aboard and doing some work on it, although it was in good shape, and chartering a bit, but kind of like whatever. And so I started talking to him about the idea of doing some sail training, and if he knew anything about it, would he ever thought about it, etc. And he was interested, but the scope of the organization of it all seemed a bit far-fetched. So we attempted a couple of seminars as a sort of toe in the water in affiliation with Bellevue Community College, and where we would be taking groups of people out on communication skills seminars up to San Juan Islands. And that actually grew a bit. The people really enjoyed it as part of the psychology program at Bellevue Community College, and so then one year we had too many people to fit on the boat because they essentially were six packs, right? Oh, so you couldn't take a lot of people on them. Right, so we were scratching our heads trying to figure out.
So what do you mean by six pack?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. So a six pack is a way of licensing a vessel for passengers. Okay. That allows up to six passengers.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sorry.
Yep, no problem.
And so this is one of the real issues about groups of people on a vessel is the regulations around carrying passengers
on a charter vessel.
When there's money that changes hands, when there's for hire. Yeah. So I didn't know anything about that at the time, but I learned quickly that, so there's a limitation here. So we tried interestingly enough, one of the solutions was, well, what if we had two boats and we sailed in company, and then we could have 12 and we could do some interesting things, with how that would go. So it turns out that one of Ron's friends was a gentleman named Del Egbert, who had the schooner Martha in Olympia.
Oh, really?
So you're familiar with the Martha, right?
Yeah.
It was also, interestingly enough, a Crowninshield schooner. And it's a similar situation. He thought about chartering, but it always seemed kind of too hard to organize. But Del thought, well, what the heck, let's give it a try. So we gave it a try. And, it was kind of mixed. It was a lot of work. And I would say varying success. We've made maybe one or two attempts at doing this. And so finally, what they are saying to me is, Ken, you were so into sail training, you should go talk to the people on Adventurous. That's what they do.
Oh, really?
I thought to myself, and nobody's mentioned this to me yet? Right? And I said, Adventurous, what's that? Okay. So This was now 1978. Okay. And it turns out that in 1978, the American Sail Training Association, ASTA, was organizing a tall ships race on the West Coast. And so the U.S. Coast Guard Bark Eagle and the Nippon Maru and a number of the local vessels were all participating in this. There may have been others. I can't remember all of them. The ships came to Victoria, and they went up to Vancouver, and then they sailed from Vancouver to Seattle. And so they had a big festival down on the waterfront, greeting the vessels as they came in, Seattle waterfront. And I thought, wow, this is cool. This is like what happened in New York just a few years ago. I want to go down to that big sea shanty festival there, and it was really neat. So I went. And so I'm standing there on the docks, on the waterfront, and, with the crowds and looking at the vessels, enjoying the scene. And there was a group of the smaller boats that were tied up and in kind of a cluster, and they'd put out some floats for them. And, most of the boats, you're just a spectator on the dock, and it's hard to really tell what's going on. The crews are busy or they're tired because they've just had this overnight race, and there isn't really much interaction. Yeah. But this one ship had a group of kids sitting on the deck singing, and I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Right?
Yeah.
And so I wandered down the dock, and they had some brochures out, etc. And so I didn't want to interrupt them. They obviously had a neat program going. It turned out to be a group of Girl Scouts. They all had matching shirts on, and they were obviously all really energized and enthusiastic. It reminded me of the kind of thing that I had been seeing in the effects of sail training. And so I grabbed one of their brochures, and I didn't really talk to anybody because I didn't want to interrupt them. Well, so, brochure, adventurous.
Really?
I thought, wow. No kidding. And then what really got me was the address was Mercer Island. Well, that's where I went to high school. I thought, how can this be?
Kidding.
Right? How can I not know this?
Yeah.
Right?
Was that Youth Adventure then?
That was Youth Adventure. Okay. Ernestine Bennett was running the program at the time. And, well, the answer became obvious later. The ship didn't go to Mercer Island.
Yeah.
It was in Lake Union when it wasn't operating. And she had a home office, essentially. That was the Mercer Island address.
I see.
But so I hadn't really had my head in the sand as bad as I thought when I read that. But so that's how I was able to reach out to them, and I got the kind of response that's not unlike what you would get today. And in some ways I find that fascinating. It was very, oh, hi, great that you're interested. And, well, gosh, why don't you, the season is kind of wrapping up. Why don't you come down for a work party? They're going to start in the fall here in a few weeks, and we can get to know you that way. You can get to know the ship, see what we're doing, and this is how our volunteer program works. And yes, there's an opportunity to sail, but you kind of you need to become informed in order to take on a role as a volunteer as a deckhand. Mm-hmm. And so I did. I started working in work parties that winter. And
down Lake Union?
It was at Lake Union Dry Dock, and we downrigged, and we're working on the boat. And one of the things I learned was that the ship had been certified as an inspected passenger-carrying vessel, what they would call under a T-boat. Subchapter T is the regulation that Coast Guard regulation that certifies vessels for carrying passengers, and so. This is what was a game changer for a vessel that is trying to engage in some kind of a program that involves people, is that now you can have a number of people that goes beyond 6 that allows the economics of the equation to start to work.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
and it really, I think, as we may talk about the history of adventurous, and one of the questions I often ask myself now as we are celebrating the centennial is, why is this ship still here when so many others aren't? What are those factors? I think this is, it's a National Historic Landmark vessel. There are only 2,400 National Historic Landmarks in the entire country.
Really?
There's 56,000 sites on the National Registry of Historic Places. But landmarks are considered of very special significance, that they've been given this different status. And there are only 2,400 National Historic Landmarks that have been identified by the National Park Service. Of those, there are only 126 vessels. And there's actually 4 wrecks that are considered National Historic Landmarks. They're dive sites, some of them, which I think is a fascinating thing that they're doing. I think it's
interesting.
Great. Because it's a very authentic...
It's an underwater...
Yeah, it's an underwater...
exhibit,
I didn't really know.
Interesting.
Yeah, isn't that fascinating? Of those 126 National Historic Landmark vessels, there are only 15 that are sailing vessels that are in operation. The rest are museum ships. You can't actually engage with them in the way that they were intended to. You can go aboard some of them, you can look at them, but you can't sail them. And of those 15, there are only 2 on the West Coast. And yet we know...
Who was the other one?
Alma.
Alma?
Alma, the scow schooner in San Francisco.
Okay, yeah. I'm familiar with that boat.
Okay. Oh, yeah. That's a neat story, where they pulled it off the mud flats and restored it. The National Park Service did for the National Maritime Museum in San Francisco.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
And so Adventurous and Alma, that's all
on the West Coast
that are on the West Coast.
Wow.
Yeah,
that is really.
And
cool.
so here, so that was, just a quick introduction. That's what got me involved, and so I started sailing with them, and one voyage led to the next. And you were asking about sea time earlier.
Yeah.
Well, I ended up sailing really that whole summer, essentially.
Were you sailing at San Juan's or?
Yes, the route was the ship stayed. The certification is for inland waters, so Victoria was commonly on the itinerary. The ship in that era would tend to go for at least a week, sometimes 10 days. The schedule was different. It was the Youth Adventure Program was really all about just getting a group on board and sailing. It was almost a sailing school. They had small boats, sea scouters, that they built, and they would carry 4 of them with their little masts and sails, and so they would do. It was quite a small boat sailing instruction, large boat sailing instruction, adventure camp kind of experience, and a sail training component to it, in the sense that you really did, as a youth, become part of the crew. It was the ship was not sailed for you; you were the crew, and that became part of the growth opportunity experience.
Yeah.
So that's that really became something that I was doing for many weeks in the summer.
Because you were off of school in the summer?
Well, I had just finished graduate school. And so to tie that back, and so I was desperate to do something other than be in summer school.
Yeah,
so the chance to go sailing and then not have to pay for it, right? Because I was volunteering, was perfect.
Yeah,
right?
really.
And so one thing led to another, and it was not that many years later that the skipper, who at the time was Carl Mayer, came along, tapped me on the shoulder, and said, "Ken, it's time for you to get your license."
Wow.
What? Right? But he needed some people available to do some relief work, and so I did.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what year did you get your license, Ken?
I'm sorry?
What year did you get your license, captain's license?
Oh, golly. I should go back and look.
In the 80s? Or?
It would have been in the 80s, yeah.
Okay.
It would have been 86, I'm thinking, somewhere in there.
Yeah. Now, when did it change from youth adventure to sound experience?
That was a gradual process.
Oh, was it? Okay.
I was on the youth adventure board at the time when Monty Morton and Barb Wyatt, who were the founders of Sound Experience, came, and they had this program idea that he had been on the Clearwater and the Hudson, and she'd been involved in the program. He'd been skippering, and they were back in Puget Sound. His family, they're from here, and his family's from Bainbridge. His dad, very well known, respected sailor, and inquired. They had a really interesting idea about a educational program that would inspire youth and adults here in Puget Sound to understand the importance of the Puget Sound waterway and how to respect it and take care of it. And they basically made a pitch to us as the Youth Adventure Board. They wanted to charter the boat for their program.
Oh.
We told them no.
That's a bad idea.
Well, Youth Adventure was a summer program, right? It was the entire business model was built around essentially two primary people, Ernestine Bennett, who was the board chair and person that really ran the program organization, and then Carl Mayer, who was the captain, and he had a winter business, and so this is what he did in the summer. And so what the Sound Experience wanted to do was to expand the season into the spring. Well, we just weren't set up to do it, was for one thing, and the other was we didn't charter the boat. Sorry, right? And this is true to today. The boat is not available for charter. You can't come along and say, "Hey, I want to take that boat and have a party on board," right? Yeah. The ship is all about its mission, and that's it. And so we said, well, no, we don't charter, because when you charter, by definition, you give up control, right? It's like renting something.
Yes.
Right? And a charterer would want that. When you think about it, if you do a bareboat charter, right, you're going to maybe have some guidelines about the operational area and nature of operations and things like that. But once it's like, renting anything else, you're in charge and you've taken responsibility and you go do what you're choosing to do. Yeah. Well, that's not what Adventurous was about. So we told them no. Well, no, sometimes never stays no. Yeah. And because we were intrigued with the idea, but we continued in discussions with them, looked at some solutions to solve the scheduling and issues, and we're also recognizing that this was in the late 80s now, okay? And so it was beginning to be evident that the maintenance program for the ship was starting to escalate, right? We were starting to see things that were going to involve more investment, right? And so the Board of Youth Adventure was beginning to think about what are the options to bring more revenue into the program so that we can direct it into the care for the ship. And that clearly involved, there's a number of ways to do that, and one is a fundraising component. Well, fundraising is about people wanting to invest in something they believe in. And the historic piece, that whole narrative for the ship is very powerful and convincing. And we should talk about that a little bit. The sail training component, to some, is equally powerful and convincing. But essentially at the time, those were the two narratives. Sound Experience was adding a third leg. and that is a passion for environmentalism and sustainability. And this was something that we were less schooled in than they were. So they were really bringing an asset and something that we were at a time in our culture that people are beginning to be more and more aware of and interested in and wanting to invest in. And so that's essentially what started the process of really, the Sound Experience started for the first few years only doing a spring program. And we worked it out. It wasn't easy trying to figure out who could operate the ship that everybody felt comfortable with. And there were some skinned knees with all that at times as you would try to make that really work. But, you pick yourself up and you move on, and those things did sort themselves out in time. Until we came to the point that it was evident that the need to manage all this was beginning to exceed that very small infrastructure that Youth Adventure had been its ticket for sustainability. Youth Adventure had always kept zero overhead, which is what it allowed it to be successful on the scale that it was. Mm-hmm. Right? And now, as the season grew, that needed to change. And so I won't go into all of the detail, but essentially an agreement was arrived at that Sound Experience would purchase the ship.
Oh, okay.
And cool. And that started in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. And then from then, Sound Experience, at the time, was a bigger organization. And they added to their board, and they rolled up their sleeves, and since then have gone from there to what we see today, with having started in 2009 the process of an extensive restoration to the entire vessel. And today, as we sit here, we are engaged in the first part of the 5th phase of that restoration project. And I am very pleased to be able to tell you that as we put the last plank on the port side just last week, the entire port side of Adventurous has now been rebuilt.
Wow. So is the 5th phase, is that the final phase?
No, well, it of the hull.
I guess
the hull.
Okay.
This is we have, any project to manage it, to plan it, to carry it out, and to fund it, it needs some structure.
Yeah.
And sure. And you've got to plan it in such a way that you sequence things that so that the work makes sense and it's efficient, and one piece of the project complements another rather than gets in its way or interferes, or you have to rework or things like that. Yeah. So it's you mentioned that you look at some of the records of the organization and you see me as chairing the ship committee, and because of my experience having sailed on the ship and captained the ship for a number of years, so I was kind of available and had a little bit of background enough in the ship to kind of help on that end of really spearheading the management of that project. And so the Centennial Restoration Project is what we're calling it, and that has involved 5 phases. And the 5th phase we had initially wanted to do as we had thought we would do as one project, and the 5th phase. Well, let me start with the first phase. So the first phase involved doing the port bow frames and replanks all the way back to the chain plates on the foremast, which are the big metal anchors that hold the rig up that the shroud's attached to. And a new hawse pipe for the anchor, and then a new stem on the vessel. Okay, we So that went basically all the way aft to about amidships and then down just below the trim of the bilge. Okay. The second phase involved similar project on the starboard side. So back to about, not quite as far back, but past the chain plates. And the reason for that is that in 06 and 07, we had already done extensive work amidships on the starboard side to reframing and replanking, and some deck work when the new deck house was put on. And there may be people that remember that. So there, we knew we would be working up against new work when we worked our way out. And the new stem was already done now. Okay. And part of the basic project planning was to, first of all, make sure that we knew that the skeleton, the backbone of the vessel was intact or renewed, and then to work in a way that, part of the marching orders for the ship committee is that, see, this is a ship that is U.S. Coast Guard certified for small passenger carrying vessels, we said, and it operates over 200 days a year.
Wow.
Okay. And this is part of what keeps it alive, is that it's programmed. These things are integral to each other. It's an interesting, fascinating ship with its design and its history. But it is also a very much a ship in the present, in that it takes people today out to experience not only what it's like to sail on a ship of that nature, but into today's marine environment and with today's social interactions. And it's the community around the ship and the interaction that they have both on the ship and from the ship with our today's environment that is part of what makes the conviction of keeping this vessel alive so powerful to the community that surrounds it. And so these things are crucial to go hand in hand. So the marching orders to the ship committee from the board of directors is this ship will operate over 200 days a year. So your job is to make sure it does without interruption. I don't want to walk down the dock and have to say to a group of people that have come for however many miles and worked for however many days, if there's kids, to generate the funds to have a chance finally to go on this really cool ship and say, I'm sorry, we have a breakdown. Right? I don't know about you.
Sounds like there could be a little pressure there at times, Ken.
Well,
a lot of planning goes into all that, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's that. We want this to work.
Definitely.
And part of that is because this is something that we all look forward to, and certainly our participants.
Yeah.
So that's part of the marching orders. But you're right. That's a big bill. How many 100-year-old vessels can deliver 200 days of service without interruption every season? Okay. But then the other marching order to the ship committee was to plan this restoration project so that we could engage in this type of massive rehabilitation and still be ready to go on day one of the season in the middle of March. Okay, so we've only got 3.5. We've got to downrig the vessel. We've got to get the gear off of it. We've got to get going on the project.
I better let you go, Ken. You got to get over there to Port Townsend and get cracking on that.
We're going to have the materials ready to go. We've got to know what we're doing, right?
Man.
And then we got to get in and get out and get her done, get her sealed up, get the Coast Guard happy, and get going on that first day of the season.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So it's a pretty interesting project in that way.
Yeah, definitely,
right?
Definitely.
And so that's why it was conceived in phases. Okay.
Yeah.
And then do you remember the Vote for the Boat project, a program?
I do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So wasn't that exciting?
Yeah.
So this was the National Trust for Historic Preservation, funded by American Express, and this is the style of what they do. They do this in other parts of the country too. And when they came here to Puget Sound, they identified, I think it was 25 historic sites, and then they allowed the public to vote to say, well, what's your favorite, right? And the winner gets $125,000 for a project they identify. Well, we identified the transom counter stern, that beautiful stern on the ship that is one of its iconic aspects. It's part of the shape of the hull is part of why it's recognized as a National Historic Landmark, because it uniquely represents that era of vessels in our country.
Yeah.
And we knew we had some work to do there, and we hadn't yet figured out how to fund it, so it was a perfect opportunity. Well, here, amongst 25 other sites in the Seattle area, many of them well-known, like Fifth Avenue Theater and Town Hall Seattle, and a number of other sites in the area, Adventurous won.
Oh, you're kidding.
We got the most votes.
Wow. What year was that, Ken?
That was, oh boy, that was that 10?
2010.
I think it was 10 or 11. Yeah. Okay.
Interesting. Interesting.
And that was really exciting. It was a month-long online voting, and the community really got behind Vote for the Boat. And so thanks to this, what I mean about this...
Because you were the only boat in the voting, probably.
No, the Arthur Foss.
Oh, the Arthur Foss was too.
One of the sites.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I want to be careful because I don't want to leave anybody out because I'm going off the top of my head here.
Yeah.
But I recall, I don't know if if the lightship might have been as well.
Oh, okay.
I can't. I'd have to go back and look.
Yeah.
But yeah. See, we have to be careful about only boats because then there's the tug, what is it, the Fur? Or no, it's in Olympia.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah, there's a historic tug.
Sandman?
Yeah, maybe that's it. Yeah, see, we don't want to leave these our fellow historic vessels out.
Right.
But we were fortunate that because, and this is part of what I'm saying, that as I've really spent a lot of time reflecting on this, because if it works, do more of it, right? And while on one hand I talk about, there's so few National Historic Landmark vessels, and there's only 2 National Historic Landmark sailing vessels. Now, you notice I'm qualifying that because there are other National Historic Landmark vessels on the West Coast, but they're not sailing vessels in operation, okay? Yeah. Because I see this as a important distinction that is important for all of us that are interested in preserving these really unique, special ships to think about is what works. Because if it works, do more of it. Yeah. Unfortunately, so many of this is tough stuff. It's not. It takes a lot of support to make this possible, and it can't just be passion. It's got to go to real. It's got to get real, and it takes. As I was saying about the project, it takes management, it takes planning, it takes fundraising, but at the end of the day, it also takes skill. See, and passion from the people that are willing to work. We are fortunate enough to not only get the help from people that are inspired enough to go every day to vote for the boat so that we can realize the donation from that. And restore the stern, but then they'll come down and they'll help us do the work, and that makes it. They will volunteer their time, and that makes it possible. Yeah. But it takes also the skilled commercial shipwrights, and those are important words.
Know what a FUDUC
skilled,
is. Right.
They have to have the right skills.
Yeah.
And they have to be able to deliver that skill at a commercial level because it takes a shipyard to work on a ship of this size, right? And they've got to be able to deliver it at a cost that's affordable. Okay. Yeah. Now these things are not always compatible, right? And we have been remarkably fortunate. By having the people in the Puget Sound area that have preserved these skills. So part of what I would tip my hat to are, you see so many of our so many programs that have been around for years, many without a lot of recognition, that are preserving the skills to work on wooden vessels. And we see this at North Seattle Community College, we see this at the boat school in Port Townsend, not North Seattle, Seattle Central Community College, the boat school in Port Townsend. We see this in the apprenticeship programs that we've seen in some of our shipyards over the years. And this is a part of the Puget Sound history because we have had a fishing fleet here. And many of the vessels were wooden fish boats.
Yeah.
And this is what kept many of the shipwrights in Ballard and in the Seattle area, and there were places all along the Sound where you can still see some of the
kept those guys in business, didn't it?
Exactly, Bellingham, Anacortes, Loverick's yard there. These are not incidental to the survival of these vessels. When I first, as we talked about, when I first got involved with it, just in the few years that I've been involved, in the 70s, we were at Lake Union Dry Dock. Well, there were shipwrights all over the place there. And we were not, when we say we were at the dry dock company was interested enough in what Adventurous was doing. They were donating the moorage there. The ship was moored there. It wasn't in the dry dock.
Too.
Right, yeah. This is in Lake Union. They were wonderful that way. So, the people behind these businesses are knowledgeable and interested and supportive. Right. And they, of course, now have had, and you think of the constraints on trying to operate a dry dock in the middle of Seattle. Yeah. Right. Especially today. And so, but nevertheless, you have this kind of interest and support. But these yards now, it's not that they can't, but they just don't. How many wooden ships go into a dry dock? How many have you seen in the last 5 years, right? So we talk to yards like Foss or Vigor or Lake Union Dry Dock. They'll do everything they can to work with you, but they have a peak season and they've got these big steel vessels that are wanting to have the same work done at the same time. And so what's happened is, if it weren't for the likes of Port Townsend, Adventurous would have been in trouble a long time ago.
And the support of that community. And
the skill in that community. Yeah. The yard that we work in now, Haven Boat Yard, as it's in its current configuration, hasn't even been there that long. So in some ways, what we're seeing is a resurgence of interest and capacity. Yeah.
That's where Julia Maynard is. Right?
That's where Julia Maynard is. That's right.
And her partner.
Stephen Gale.
Stephen
Gale.
Yeah. Right.
And but that yard has evolved over time. And there are other yards. There's the co-op there in Port Townsend, but what happened was that the Port of that was a game changer. The Port of Port Townsend put in place that 300-ton haul-out facility. What that means is the taxpayers in Port Townsend invested in capacity. Okay, yeah, because it's a port. Somebody had to pay for that. Somebody conceived that idea and they paid for it. Right. Okay, well, it probably some degree came to the taxpayers to float those bonds, but the result is that there is now the capacity to do this kind of work. And I can tell you that the first time that ship was hauled, the Adventurous was hauled on that lift, I was a really nervous, unhappy camper. And because I had only, my
experience... She's a 98-ton ship?
It's 115 deadweight.
115, okay.
Long tons. Tonnage is how you measure it.
Different ways.
Yeah, right. But if you're actually lifting the darn thing, it's 115.
Oh, okay. So maybe that's the displacement tonnage is 98 or something.
Right.
Thanks, Ken, so much for taking the time to meet with me at your home, give me a good cup of coffee, and talk shop about Adventurous. What a fascinating boat and story. And it's really cool that you've got your captain's license and you've been able to spend all that time at sea and on Adventurous and keeping the tradition alive. I'm a little jealous, but I do enjoy what I'm doing. So anyway, keep up the good work, Ken. And I hope to make it to the March 23rd Centennial celebration. in Port Townsend. And if you're listening out there and you can make it to Port Townsend on the 23rd of March in the afternoon, they're going to have a centennial party, so to speak, for Adventurous, because it's been 100 years since she was launched. Next week, come back for part 2 of the interview. Also, if you'd like to connect with me, you can do that through email, dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. You can subscribe to my newsletter. Go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/subscribe. You can leave comments on my website with the show notes. You can connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest if you look for Wooden Boat Dan. You can call my voicemail feedback hotline, 424-261-2360. And you can actually leave me a message right from your computer if it's got a microphone in it. On my website, on the right-hand side, there's a little banner that's vertical that says Send Voice Message. Click on that and you can send a recorded message to me, which I would love. You can also subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. If you go to the iTunes store to podcasts, search for Hooked on Wooden Boats. You can subscribe there. If you enjoy the show, go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/Amazon and make a purchase of anything on Amazon, and I get paid a small commission. Or if you want to purchase boat building and marine supplies, go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/JD. That takes you to Jamestown Distributors. They've got a ton of stuff, great prices, and I get paid a little bit on that. And also there's a store on my website at the top. If you click on store, you can buy flip-flops, cups, mugs, T-shirts, that sort of thing with a Hooked on Wooden Boats logo. I would love to be out on the street somewhere and see somebody with one of those T-shirts on. That would be pretty sweet. Also, check out one of the newer features on my site. If you go to the homepage and at the top menu, you click on Index, there's a list there of all the podcasts that I've published, which is 74 now. On the left-hand side is the episode number. Second column over in the table is who the podcast is with. And then third column is information about what it's about. So it's a very quick way to navigate around the website, figure out which podcasts you want to listen to or look at the pictures for. So I'd encourage you to check that out. It saves a lot of scrolling time through space. Well, as usual, it's been more fun than one person should be able to have at one time, in time. That doesn't make sense. But anyway, I thought I'd throw it in. I'm having fun, let's put it that way. Hope you have a great week out there. Get in the wooden boat game if you're not already in. Give me a call if you want to chat about it. Send me an email. All that fun stuff. Have a great week. Wooden Boat Dan over and out. Keep the bright side up and the barnacled side down. God bless. Talk to you next week.